So, how does a pretty minor city suddenly become the capital of a huge empire? And once it does, how on earth do its rulers manage to conquer and then control a massive, diverse subcontinent for over 300 years? Well, that is the absolutely incredible story of the Delhi Sultan.
Okay, so here's our game plan. We're going to start with how Delhi even became the capital in the first place. It's not what you'd expect. Then we'll see how the sultans grew from being stuck in a few forts to running a massive empire. We'll get into the clever tools they used to govern, how they dealt with the terrifying Mongol threat, and finally, we'll unpack the powerful legacy they left behind.
All right, first things first, we have to set the stage. Because before the Sultanate, Delhi was, well, it was not the center of the universe. Not even close. Yeah, back in the 12th century, under rulers like the Tamara Rajputs and later the Chauhans, Delhi was really all about commerce. It was a big deal for wealthy Jaina merchants who built a bunch of temples there. It even had its own coin, called the Delhi Wall, that was used all over the place. So a prosperous city? For sure. But the seat of a future empire? Nobody saw that coming. That all started to change in the early 13th century. The Delhi Sultanate was founded, and this kicked off a whole new era. And get this, it wasn't just one long, stable kingdom. It was actually a series of 5 different dynasties, one after the other, that would rule from Delhi for more than 300 years. So, they have a capital. Now what? You can't just plant a flag and call it an empire. We need to look at how they went from controlling just a few fortified cities to dominating a huge chunk of the subcontinent. You know, the early sultans had this massive problem. They were basically stuck inside their own garrison towns. Their control ended at the city walls. This meant they had to rely on trade or, well, plunder for even basic supplies. It was a really, really fragile situation. So they came up with this really smart 2-step plan. First, they focused on what they called the internal frontier. That meant securing the lands right around their cities, the hinterlands. They cleared forests, they pushed agriculture, and they locked down their supply lines. Only after they secured their own backyard did they turn to the external frontier, launching these huge military campaigns way down into southern India. Okay, so conquering all that land is one thing, but actually governing it, that's a whole different ballgame. So the real question is, what was in the Sultan's toolkit? How did they manage to run this massive, complicated empire? One of their most ingenious ideas was something called bandagan. Now, these were literally military slaves, bought and then trained from a young age for the most important jobs in the kingdom. And you might be thinking, why slaves in positions of power? Well, think about it. Unlike nobles who had their own lands, their own ambitions, or even a sultan's own sons who might want the throne, the bandagan owed everything to their master. Their loyalty was absolute, which, in a world of constant backstabbing, made them incredibly reliable. To manage all this new territory and keep the military paid, they developed another brilliant tool, the ikta system. Here's the gist. They'd assign a piece of land, an ikta, to a military commander, or mukti. That commander's job was to govern that land and use the money it generated to maintain his army. And this is where you see just how politically savvy they were. This wasn't a free-for-all where they just handed over land. No way. They built in a whole system of checks and balances. The job couldn't be passed down to your son. You were moved around every few years so you couldn't build a local power base. And on top of all that, state accountants were watching to make sure you collected the right amount of tax and maintained the right number of soldiers. It was a system built for control. The Sultanate wasn't just tested by powerful governors. It was also challenged by social norms. And there's no better example than Razia Sultan. I mean, even the court historians, who were not happy about a woman being in charge, had to admit she was smarter and more capable than all of her brothers combined. So if she was so good, why was she kicked off the throne in just 4 years? Well, this quote from a chronicler at the time, Minhaj-e-Siraj, tells you everything you need to know. He's basically saying, sure, she was great, but since she wasn't a man, what good were all her talents? The court and the nobles just couldn't accept a queen. Her competence, sadly, was no match for their prejudice. But as tough as internal politics were, the Sultanate's ultimate test, its real trial by fire, was about to come from the outside. I'm talking about the massive, relentless Mongol invasions. This existential threat forced 2 of the Sultanate's most powerful rulers, Alauddin Khalji and Muhammad Tughluq, to take some really extreme measures. But their strategies could not have been more different. Okay, this is fascinating. You have two sultans facing the exact same threat. First, you have Alauddin Khalji. He played defense, he raised a huge army, built a new fortress town to house them, and paid them in cash. And to make sure that cash was worth something, he put strict price controls on the market. It was a huge success. He fought off the invasions, and the economy stayed strong. Then you have Muhammad Tughlaq. He decided the best defense was a good offense. He raised an even bigger army to go attack the Mongols, but his administration was a mess. He forced residents out of the capital to make room for his army, and his biggest mistake, he introduced a token currency made of cheap metal. Nobody trusted it, the economy tanked, and his whole grand plan fell apart, leading to widespread rebellion. Two very different strategies, two very, very different outcomes. It's pretty amazing that we have such detailed accounts of all this, right? Well, it's all thanks to these Persian court histories called tawarikh. And as you can see, these weren't just quickly scribbled notes. Creating one of these manuscripts was an incredibly painstaking art form, from making the paper by hand to literally melting gold to illustrate the text. So after all that, after centuries of conquest, clever administration, and surviving existential threats, what's the big takeaway? What did the Delhi Sultanate ultimately leave behind? In the end, the Sultanate itself didn't last forever. It eventually broke apart, but you know what did last? Its ideas. The really sophisticated administrative system they built was so effective that it became the go-to blueprint for the rulers and empires that came next. And you can literally draw a straight line through history. You have the efficient systems that rulers like Alauddin Khalji pioneered. Those were then picked up and improved by Sher Shah Suri, and his administration became the direct model for the legendary Mughal Emperor Akbar. It's like the Sultanate's administrative DNA was passed down through the generations. Which really brings us to this final thought. The Delhi Sultanate was a messy, complicated period, full of conflict and change. But maybe its true success isn't measured by how long the empire itself lasted, but by the powerful system of governance it created, a system that would continue to shape the subcontinent for centuries to come.